Dr. Northworthy. This is Kimberly Alden.
And McKenna.
And Artie.
And we are going to do our video one discussion. My notes are on my iPad right here.
I have my paper notes ready.
Yeah.
And as you can see, no textbooks.
Okay, so we're going to just go through the checklist of how we started our readings. So we're starting with chapter 14, Counseling African Americans.
So
in summary,
I kind of felt like as a whole, like the chapters that we discussed were, a lot of them are fairly much on the same pages.
Yes.
Like I noticed that a lot of what everyone goes through is pretty much the same thing. There's that sense of like depression, isolation, a sense of loneliness that they get, separation from family, especially between within the immigrant families.
And when you like look at the culturally competent ways of like helping these populations, there's a lot of like similar things, a lot coming back to the counselor of like, are you evaluating your own biases? Are you evaluating your stereotypes? How can you provide basic level needs and also address mental health concerns? So a lot of it is similar for all the populations too.
Yeah. I didn't really have any like major issues. I did accidentally read chapter 15 and took notes on it and everything, and then went back and checked the checklist. Oh, we don't need to read chapter 15.
That's okay.
So that was a little frustrating, but I thought it was a little interesting though that we didn't get into the Native Americans. So that makes me question like how often would we have
that kind of population?
Yeah.
I thought the same for Jewish Americans, but we'll get there.
Yeah, but the Jewish American one, like, I don't know, maybe I'm being a jerk, but I kind of felt like that one was a little unnecessary. Like, if anything, maybe just like a brief overview saying, you know, they are a different demographic and so on and so forth. But I felt it was a little odd for students to do an entire chapter on them.
Okay, well that's why. That's interesting. We touched on that, right? On this reading.
Yeah, it was
that was
like
chapter 26, right? 21?
It was the last
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that first, if you have a point on it.
Okay, go for it.
So why did you think that was unnecessary?
Well, I mean, maybe I'm feeding into the whole discussion about how they're not necessarily a minority group, and I don't agree with that. They are a minority group, and they have a lot of different dynamics to them. And some of it I didn't know, but some of it I already did, because like one of my best friends is Jewish, and she strongly identifies with being Jewish.
Yeah. See, I thought it was interesting because like when I think of different cultural groups and ethnicities and everything, I don't jump to thinking about Jewish people by any means. So it's like, wow, like there's me literally neglecting them, which is like part of the point.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that like they made a chapter about it, but at the same time, like it was so short and so repetitive. Like they said the same things 3 or 4 times. I was like, can we not elaborate on this? And I even made a point somewhere in my notes. Let me find it. I was like, Jewish Americans want to be recognized as, hold on, where is it? Oh, a criticism of the text. The Jewish Americans aren't recognized prevalently, and that they want to be identified and understood as having a culture that is complex and highly personal, but I feel like the text was lacking. Like, they didn't go into super great detail other than repeating, like, they can be Orthodox, they can be more informal, whatever that correct term is. There's Orthodox, there's conservative, and progressive. So I just didn't feel like there was much detail about it, and if they're going to like touch on it and mention like they're overlooked, like don't overlook them.
I guess, but like my frustration just ultimately came from the fact that it's an entire chapter dedicated to it, when I think instead they could have tied it into something else. Like maybe have a chapter that's dedicated to other minority groups that may not be recognized.
Yeah, that would work. That would be effective.
Instead of a long chapter with
a
ridiculous amount of repetition.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was repetitive because these chapters follow a similar type of structure.
Yeah.
Specific strengths, challenges, best practices. It's all.
Yeah.
So,
and then
but
with
like,
the
I'm
best
kind of confused.
practices, though, it was consistent in the different types of practices for pretty much every single group.
Yeah, okay, they're similar, yeah, but I'm just curious. So why don't I'm more curious as to why you particular, or why some people in particular may not see Jewish people as a minority group,
I do agree that they are a minority group,
or
but
they don't deserve a chapter per se in this.
I don't think a chapter because
Why are they lesser
of
than
all of the
that?
groups that we've discussed. I would say that the Jewish population is very acculturated to the standard American society, but yet they're still very strong in maintaining their culture and their religion, depending on the different sects.
Can you give examples of that? Because I have a totally different. I don't see that at all.
Okay. Like you can walk around town. You can go to different parts of cities. You can go to like, unless someone is an Orthodox, you would never know that they're Jewish.
So it's because there's like not a physicality necessarily about their like minority status that they're easier to overlook, essentially.
Potentially, I think ultimately, like when they talk about the discrimination, the discrimination against Jews doesn't necessarily come out unless they're in specific areas. Because I would say, in the bigger cities, for example, that's predominantly where most Jewish societies tend to live. There's a huge Jewish community down in Fort Lauderdale, Tampa area, and it's a mix of white Jews, Hispanic Jews, and my friend who's a white Jew, she goes everywhere, and she's never faced a discrimination factor that I think Sue and Sue is saying is so prevalent. Like Holocaust deniers, there's
saying.
Not necessarily
people
as
aren't talking
many
about that as much as they're talking about like being racist towards somebody of a different color that's walking by.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say that there is zero discrimination against Jews, because there is discrimination. Like we've got neo-Nazis.
It's more like covert?
I would definitely say it's more covert, because, and if anyone is probably getting it in an overt manner, I would say it's more likely an Orthodox Jew, because again, it's that visual aspect.
Yeah.
It's like you can visually tell that this person is an Orthodox Jew, whereas my friend, you would never know. She's a stereotypical like American beauty. She's like almost 6 foot, long blonde hair, blue eyes, very pale skin. Like she's that ideal. So unless you talk to her and look at her necklace, you'd never know that she's Jewish. Mm-hmm. And she's also not going to face the same kind of discrimination as I would say is maybe a Hispanic Jew, because she doesn't have that visual aspect.
There's white privilege almost in being.
There's definitely Jewish. a privilege for her because she fits physically she fits into the ideal. But I feel that a whole chapter isn't necessarily needed, because I would say in a way the discrimination with Jews, and I'm open to being proven wrong, but I would say discrimination against Jews is slowly fizzing out more and more. And the only people that I've ever known or heard of being overtly against Jews are neo-Nazis. And
at this point in history, they're not on the forefront per se.
Yeah.
I feel like you're itching to say something.
Well, yeah, so Sue and Sue disagree with you, because they say in one of the last parts, Jewish people are the most targeted group for hate crimes in the country.
For hate crimes, yes.
So, hate crimes aren't the only form of discrimination, but a pretty big one. So they tend to disagree with you. And then...
but then that also draws on a question which I've had continuously. The examples that Sue and Sue uses for a lot of these chapters, how recent are they?
I think they're somewhat recent. I think a big part of the increase of hate crimes is probably the rise in the internet. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if they're counting those statistics in there. Yeah. But I see what you're saying. Like it can kind of be hidden in plain sight, because most Jews are white. They don't, unless you're Orthodox, you don't really you don't really present as a minority. You can pretty much hide play sight, like I just said. Another thing it just sparked my memory. So I'm sure you guys heard about the Roseanne controversy.
Yes.
So she was on Rogan's podcast this week and was talking about how she her tweet, the point she was trying to explain the point of her tweet. I'm not going to make any value judgments, but she was saying that the point of it was that this was about nothing about her race. This is about the Iran nuclear deal. And since she's a Jewish woman, she had strong ties to Israel, and it's something that she disagrees with because she feels like it'll hurt Jewish people in the region. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people just kind of disregarded, maybe because that Jewish people are, like you said, can hide in plain sight like that. Obviously, wasn't the most eloquently worded thing to say. But it was just kind of interesting to hear her perspective on that. She felt like she was just kind of, I'm trying to make a stand for Jewish people in the region here, and she kind of just got completely obliterated. She felt like she was doing the right thing in the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I feel like she does it a lot though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna.
Sometimes I think she just needs to.
We can.
Don't talk.
Yeah, we can debate. Whatever. It's not interesting or relevant to debate whether she said is okay or not. But I thought it was an interesting point that she was. No one really sees that. That's another hidden aspect of what being a Jew is like in society.
No, it's an interesting example, and the fact that even they talk about how so many multicultural texts and articles and stuff don't even address Jewish people. That's
and I would agree that there is a lack of representation.
Yeah,
and maybe I'm wrong in thinking, but I don't know. Does representation necessarily fit into the outright discrimination category, or is that just us being ignorant of our lack of acceptance?
I have a question for you guys. Feel free not to answer this, but are you guys religious at all?
No.
Yes? No? No. See, I feel like our generation is way more or less religious than previous generations.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And I feel like that type of, part of the reason why it may go undetected is that we just don't care.
Yeah.
I don't,
I mean,
it's not important to us.
Something I would want to talk about with my friend who is Jewish. She's, like I said, totally outright Jewish. She's got her necklace.
What does she identify in? Is she conservative or progressive?
She's more progressive. She's not conservative, but she does have conservative aspects. She does recognize every Jewish holiday. She recognizes every Jewish holy day. Yeah. Not necessarily a holiday, but and she goes to Israel a lot and everything. So cool. She does. She's awesome. She's kind of on that line between conservatism and progressive. Cool. So I don't know. I'd want to talk to her about it because I'm open to being proven wrong. But I guess for me, because there's that lack of that visual aspect, and there's the lack of the news media saying really anything. If there's discrimination against Jews, the only time I've ever heard was when there was threats going to that Jewish community that's here in Orlando.
Yeah,
the community center. Yeah, there's a bomb threat or something for their community. Yeah, and that was the only time that I have ever remembered anyone ever being outright other than a neo-Nazi.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Do we have to read? I don't know. I read this. How Jews became white folks. Is that required? I think we can tie that in.
Yeah, we can definitely tie that in.
Yeah, because it talked about how basically they went over the history of how Jewish people were basically extended into white people as a part of the package of benefits that the post-war World War II veterans were afforded. So the GI Bill, all the other housing benefits, that all the other minorities were not necessarily granted. So they just got lumped into there, and it kind of tries to disprove the myth that they're the model minority, so to speak. Like they, work hard and stress education. And it basically it says that they were given an unearned advantage so much.
Yeah, they totally played into those like very American ideals about success and efforts and pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, and
but those
where they
kinds
do
of-
reinforce culture, they did acculturate, and they do blend, like you
They
said, hidden in plain
do,
sight.
but I think an argument can be made that they had those ideals before America was ever created anyway. Like it goes back to like even ancient times. Like they've always been accused of whenever there's a financial crisis, the Jews have always been blamed. And that goes back to even the Middle Ages. And with the Spanish Inquisition, Jews have always been a very prosperous, and that is a root in their culture.
Now, what do you think prosperity has to do with their culture, and also possibly that like tie with did Jews become white folks? So they talk about, or they question, did Jews become white because they became middle class?
See, a lot of like the cultures that may not even be written down, but it's a part of their living, because being Jewish and living by the religion specifically, they have a set rules of what you can and cannot do. They live and abide by the 10 Commandments.
Yes.
Especially Orthodox Jews, like the 10 Commandments, that is their law.
Yeah.
That is their base law structure, and they're all about family and community. They've always lived in tribes for the longest time, so it's that idea where they kind of stick with their own, but to them they do it to the extent that they get together even when they don't live next door. They get together every week. They celebrate holidays as groups, so they have that strong family connection, like treat their neighbor as you would treat yourself. It's but then some of the other not necessarily spoken ones are being prepared for the worst, I guess is a good way to put it. Because throughout history, they've constantly been persecuted, and like when they were slaves in Egypt, they were constantly prepared to leave. Like they're always in a set of be prepared for the worst. I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm tracking it on that, but
No, you're good. How do you feel like that has an impact on the psyche of Jewish people?
I feel like even just from the readings of like the Rothenberg about how Jewish became white folks, I think they touch on kind of the generational shift. The author is of one generation. She also speaks differently of her parents' generation, and how she says specifically, her parents came from a generation believed Jews overcame anti-Semitism because Jews are special. The author believes Jews who are upwardly mobile were special among Jews and were the ones writing the story. But she kind of says in this article to her parents, like, think what you might have been without racism and without some affirmative action. So it seems like she, even one generation later, has a different perspective than like that deeply rooted like cultural, we are special, kind of like the chosen group of people.
This whole idea of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and hard work first versus like there's structural things that bring certain groups down. I've kind of been wrestling a lot with in this class. Because like I think they're both true to a certain extent, because you can't. You can have all the advantage of the world and be a nobody, and then you can still, even though it might be tougher, a lot tougher to pull yourself out, you can still pull yourself out of a bad situation if you dedicate yourself to it. And I've just kind of been trying to figure out like where is the line, if there is one, or like where what could be.
Where is the line between it's my fault and it's society's fault?
Yeah, so
like locus of control, locus of responsibility.
Exactly.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I can definitely agree with that. I put it in one of my journals because sometimes it's hard for me to kind of look on the news because I go back and forth all the time with certain issues that I'm having. But if I look on the news and I see that there is, let's say, and you see like a black man has robbed a bank or a Hispanic man has like shot somebody. At what point do we say, okay, he made that choice to do that?
Yeah.
But then people are like
yes, you recognize
society
position, but also like you did engage in this activity.
Yeah, it's like I do
it is not right.
recognize. I do recognize that the system set him up for failure.
But he still chooses to do it.
Exactly.
I feel you.
And I don't know what it's like to see like white people on the TV doing all these bad things. However, I do know that a large majority of like child molesters and are white. So, and I mean that puts me a little on edge. But I don't know what it's like to sit there from the TV and look at the news and see that every criminal is usually someone of color.
Isn't your race, yeah.
And so I don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do recognize they still made that choice.
Yeah. It's a fine line. Yeah, it's hard. Shall we go to something else? We can tie that, I feel like, into other things.
Yeah, do you have anything in mind that you want to...
Let's see.
I had a lot of issues in the immigrants location.
Okay, let's go to it. So we've done chapter...
That'll be good. We can talk about
21.
some current political stuff.
Chapter 20.
20? Okay.
With the immigrants. In my notes, I have
With
like
the
8
immigrants.
Yes. And that sounds like I have issues with immigrants. I don't. I had issues with this chapter.
Okay, tell us.
Because they lumped immigrants as a whole.
True.
And when I think immigrant, I think someone who came here, and I jump on the illegal bandwagon. And then he's tying in
I see shit.
undocumented.
Okay.
And that's where I have a problem.
And getting refugees in there and everything else. Okay.
Yeah, because
So refugees, asylees, no problem. It's the undocumented.
Okay.
So yeah, you have it because I don't know because I'm not a refugee, a legal immigrant, or an illegal immigrant, but I would guess this experience is markedly different for all three.
Definitely.
Maybe a little similar for refugees. It's probably a lot different. Refugees come here from a situation where they're in grave danger and they're kind of just all of a sudden plopped out of nowhere. Legal immigration takes
forever.
You're here for, my girlfriend's in the process of being a legal immigrant, and she's been here for 10 years, and she's nowhere close.
Which they said statistically, you're usually here about a decade or something. I think they cited in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I disagree with that. I think the process for becoming a legal citizen is overly complicated, especially considering how many people want to come to this country. So in my opinion, if they're trying to come here legally, why are you making it so hard? I mean, they can't necessarily do anything wrong to the economy if they come here legally.
Well, the argument would be that you can't take too many people too quickly. So
well, not too quickly, but 10 years.
It is a long time.
To get your naturalization. I think that
it's
is
probably even longer.
Ridiculously long amount of time.
Do you think that's part of the point? Do you think it's hopefully a deterrent?
I think it could potentially be a major deterrent, especially for like South American families. Because within that 10 years, I'm fairly certain you can't go back home longer than a certain amount of time.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I'm confused.
So I have a friend who's getting naturalization right now, and he can go back and visit his family, but it can't be within a certain. It can't be longer than a certain amount of time.
He can't leave our country, or
yeah,
he can't stay in his.
My girlfriend can't go back to South Africa.
Yeah,
she risks not being able to get back in the country.
Yeah, yeah, and they brought it up in the movie The Proposal, where she was denied naturalization because she went to Canada.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And it has to do with the home country. You can't go back to your home country. So in countries where, like Asia or South America, where they place such strong ties to the family and culturally family is everything, not being able to go back for 10 years, that's a problem. And I think that's so wrong.
What do you think should be how do you change it? So what's the timeline? How many immigrants can you let in a year? What processes do you think they should have to go through?
See, I mean, at that point, I don't even know.
That's such a big thing.
It's
so
I don't know a lot about it, because my issue is the illegal part. If you are crossing a border, you are technically committing a crime. So of course you're going to be arrested.
But do you think,
but
like, just to play devil's advocate, like if you're a parent and you're coming, or if you're a pregnant mother and you cross the border illegally, but you want your child to have something different,
I think that's playing with the system. But it's and I even wrote somewhere in here that I am so on the fence with this, because if you are under the age of 18, if you are still technically a child, an adolescent, a minor, and you cross the border by yourself, let them in. Let the child in. They clearly left their family for a reason. They left for a reason.
Or their parents have brought them something, whatever. But then how are they going to get?
That's a little irresponsible. Yeah, you can't. If you're here as you're like 15, you can't do it. You're not.
You can't do a job. You can't. But I think if you're gonna do.
But when they fall into the legal system,
they would.
Like, would that go into? Are you just like an orphan in a different country then, essentially? Like, psychologically, that's gonna have huge effects.
Psychologically, it's effects, but I'm talking about just being allowed to be here or not. Like, even this, I'm not even touching on the psychological aspect of it. I know it would be really hard, but they left for a reason. They are here, and
wouldn't that be more of a refugee situation though, which you said you're on board with?
Yeah, then that'd be fine. But
so it's just when they're an adult, when they're no longer a minor and they've crossed the border, you're like, no.
I know, is it? And like I said, it's so hard for me. I'm so stuck in the middle. I think if a minor has left their family and they're coming over to the States, they're going to cross the border. With the amount of patrols that are going on the border, there's a very likely chance they're going to get caught. At which point, you ask them, why have you left? Why did you come here? And if they're so terrified of going back, I don't see a problem with allowing them to stay.
Who's going to take care of them?
Yeah, who's going to take care of them?
Whose responsibility does it become to take care of these minors who now don't have families, don't have lives, don't have livelihoods?
They don't have rights in this country.
Right, they don't have rights.
I'm saying
they're
allow them.
Unspoken for little human beings.
No, I'm saying allow them to stay. Give them citizenship.
Okay, but who's going to take care of them?
For that 2-year period.
I have not thought about that part.
Okay.
That part has not.
We gotta make sure they eat and that they're cared for.
I have not even gotten to that part. My issue with the adult aspect of it, though, is that to some degree you have control over your life. You have more capability than a 10-year-old to go down to the foreign.
You need to do it the quote unquote right way.
Try and go the right way. You have the choice. You have more capability to do that.
But what if you're a woman from a Hispanic culture and you're trying to bring your family over because, well, I'll just give an example I know of. So my boyfriend's father owns a construction company. A lot of his workers are actually illegal immigrants. One of them has just to hear this man's story of how he actually got to this country, it's it sounds like a movie. It's you know what, you're hardworking, you deserve to be here, you're not going to do anything wrong, you're not committing any crime, why in the world could you not have a better life because you're fighting for it more than some Americans who are here with privilege unearned, you know? So there's part of me that's that's hard, he can't be here and has every right and deserves to be. And he has a daughter who has to be moved around to different homes within the country each and every day because a gang has found her and they come, they take her, they gang rape her, and they drop her back off every day. So he can't get her to cross the border. So what he does is he crossed the border so that he could make more of a wage, send the money back home, and thus allows to pay for her to go stay at other people's homes as refuge in that country. So it's
well, then my other thought would be at that point, why didn't you bring her with you?
because he literally had to hike for miles and miles on foot and cross a river. And you know, like one of the other guys brought his wife and a child, like a young, like 5-year-old, and they had to cross a river to get here. He lost both his wife and his young child because they both couldn't cross the river and they drowned.
Yeah. But
And
why
he had to
not
continue
go
on.
to? But then my question is like, why not try? Why is it when a lot of the immigrants are coming over here illegally? Why don't do any of them even try to go the legal route first?
They might, but there might be so many obstacles that even like a really physically demanding, life at risk way, if you come from a different government or a different political environment, maybe that is the alternative. Maybe that feels like more of a fighting chance. As impossible as that seems to us, from a different cultural and a different worldview, maybe that's the more feasible way, which would just go to show how terrible living conditions are in other places, potentially.
And I recognize that. But that goes back to, I think we need to make it a little bit easier. I have no idea how. I have not thought that far ahead. But I do recognize
To
it's
do it correct.
ridiculously
No, I agree
hard
there,
to do it correctly.
yeah.
In other countries, it's a lot easier.
Well, they do. Yeah, I think they make a cost benefit analysis. It's like if I can see why that guy would do it. If I had I don't have a daughter, but let's say I have a sister
Yeah.
who's being gang raped,
Yeah.
I'd definitely do whatever I could to
Exactly.
get her out of that situation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you get caught or something like that,
Yeah. But I'd be
He makes
interested to know, if what would be the reasons he didn't try going the legal route?
well,
Or if he did, why was it more
Because
feasible?
the government
It's
is
too late.
corrupt and there's no way to really like make it happen. Or on other end, like maybe in a decade he could become a legal citizen, like through doing it the right way, but like maybe his government would interfere in ways that like we don't understand either, where it would make it nearly impossible for him. So if your daughter is getting gang raped, you're like, yo, I'm risking my life. I'm gonna just go do this.
Yeah, and I recognize that. So again,
Does it make it right legally? No.
No, but
Ethically,
but
maybe
still,
not. But can you understand
still,
it? Yeah.
I can understand, but still, it keeps coming back to the fact that the governments just need to get their asses on board and figure it out, because this is ridiculous.
well, yeah, I think part of the reason is like my girlfriend's here. She can't. The only reason why she has a chance of getting citizenship would be because she went to school here. She went to college here.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was able to stay and get a job, which afforded her another visa. And then she went back to grad school to get her master's, and then afforded her another visa. And so she kind of just got, the way she got in was through college. Like I doubt, poor
Which in other
workers.
countries doesn't even work. Like
Yeah.
you can't, like my friend, she got a visa to go get a master's in Europe. She now would love to get a job working there. They won't allow her to get a working visa because what she's qualified to do for work, they're like, we have our own people who can do this. So she can't get a work visa to still work there, even though she got a degree there.
Yeah.
So like America has made exceptions and ways to like let that happen.
That's true. But then there's also the flip side. When an illegal immigrant gets here, they're treated like shit. A large percentage of the time, they're treated
Wait,
like
legal or illegal?
illegal. Sorry.
Yeah.
When an illegal immigrant comes to the States, gets a job, a large majority of the time, they are treated horribly. They're taken complete
Horrible by American conditions or by their standards too?
I would say by American conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely
sure.
better than previously,
Mm-hmm.
but look at it from a generational aspect. Like even Judy in Skin Deep, like her family, I'm fairly certain her family came over illegally. I can't remember exactly, but they work on fields.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're farmers.
Farm
Not
workers.
even farmers, they're farm workers.
Yeah.
So they get very little wages. And yes, it may be a step up from where they were, but by American standards, it's awful.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
a
their
whole other point.
kids, but then their kids go through the school system, and they see, oh my gosh, my life could be so much better. Why are you treating my parents like this? Because they're illegal immigrants. And so I'm like, well, what the heck?
Yeah.
You make it ridiculously hard for them to get here in the first place. Then when they do come here illegally, you have there's no legal way for them to become citizens unless they go back and try to come the legal route. So it negates everything they did to get here in the first place. Then their kids are brought up in a really poor society. They have very little options. The school system needs a major overhaul. And then when they're growing up, they tend to stick within the same area and not do anything further because there's that constant deportation cloud hanging over their head. And they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the government won't do anything to fix it because with the illegal immigrants, we have practically free healthcare. Or not free healthcare, free labor. Practically free labor for these people to be worked like slaves and get not zero money, but very little money. So, flip side, America's not going to do anything because, hey, we've pretty much got free labor. So why would we go and do something to fix that? Yeah. Exactly. And this ties into 13th, where you've got the 13th Amendment, which says you can treat someone like a slave as long as they're a prisoner. So you can technically flip it around that if you were to go and sue the farmers for the way they treat and pay their farm workers, they can say, well, technically it's constitutional because the 13th Amendment allows it. Because they're technically illegal. So then why would you stop arresting people? Why would you stop bringing all these people in?
Cover that? Because the 13th Amendment just covers somebody who's a prisoner.
Criminal.
A criminal.
Wait, so
and an illegal immigrant is technically a criminal. So the 13th Amendment,
how do you think, just like
in a way, would cover it?
Talking about, there's a lot, just like, especially in the movie, like crime and fear, and how those are kind of almost buzzwords, that they really point that out, and how those have been used in political jargon, and so much, like you said, to bring that back to kind of almost keep these people as slaves, essentially. How do you think, like, that fits in, like, labeling them, as you just said, as like there being that fear and that, like, crime, how it's a crime, so to speak? Does that keep them like this marginalized group as they already are?
I think it definitely helps keep them where they are, because the illegal immigrant is not going to say anything because there's the fear of deportation. I'm an undocumented worker. I am an illegal immigrant. So technically, the moment they cross the border illegally with the intention of staying here and never leaving, they are officially a criminal. So
and have to live their lives as criminals and have kids who have parents who are criminals, and how that affects so much. Yeah.
I had a question for both of you in the same chapter. They talked about one of the issues with immigrants and refugees was gender issues and domestic abuse. So it says that most of the time they come from societies where men come first, and women may feel guilty if they're experiencing domestic abuse, or they come from that sort of what's the word? Very male-dominated culture. How do you think that if you run into an issue like that when you get out onto the field, how are you going to deal with it? Or how are do you think it's going to be tough for you to deal with it?
I think it would be kind of tough for me to deal with it.
It'd be really tough for you.
Yeah.
Like if you're dealing with the woman client, or like the family.
How about dealing with just the male client?
Or just the male. Oh, that's such a fine line, because when you bring in like cultures and you bring in worldviews, to be able to honor and recognize someone comes from a different worldview, but also accepting or expecting, like, we're in America and this is not allowed. I mean, it might even be as simple as coming back to saying, if it was like maybe like physical abuse or domestic violence is like considered okay, to just, without saying like, hey, I totally don't agree with this and we don't in this country, but being like, here's my intake of things, and here's the intake, like, if you're suicidal, homicidal, if you report domestic violence, like, I have to report, like, maybe that would just get expressed in that, and then it's just not even something that the client would bring up, but I don't know how you address that culturally. I've had that same thought.
That's an issue, like a larger issue that I've had. Like, there's,
I don't know how I react.
because, like, you know, Sue and Sue stress, like, you should be respectful of other people's cultures a lot. You know, you shouldn't pass your own judgments onto somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
But, like, let's say an issue like this comes up where part of their culture is kind of bad. Like, it's not. I don't think many people would agree with domestic abuse is a good thing.
Exactly.
But
is that imposing like our culture and our perspective?
Yeah, is that imposing? Yeah, is
don't
there?
know.
I don't know.
Like, it's not legal here, so we have to make sure that they know, like, from a legal perspective, if you tell me this, I have to do something.
From a legal perspective, yes.
Beyond that, like, how do you...
But I think if you're going to understand the culture, like, if you're going to go in with a multicultural type of ideal and start working with the client who is an abuser, I think the idea is to get them to understand is, yes, it's illegal. But on the other side is, this is your family.
Yeah, equipping them with other potentially
tools
to
like
handle.
Maybe getting them to recognize that yes, this is hard and this is not okay, but lashing out in the way that you are is harming your family. And maybe just keep stressing that, especially if it's coming from a Latin culture where family is so important. Like, maybe if they have a son or a daughter, do you want your daughter to marry someone who's doing what you're doing to your wife?
If it's so culturally rooted, maybe it's almost expected. That's a tricky one. That's a good question.
That's a good feeling, but when I was in city year, I worked at an inner city school where the demographic is very Latin. There was a very, I would say maybe somewhere around 70 to 80% of the entire school was from Mexico, Puerto Rico, very much Latin culture. Lord help any guy who did anything to the girls there. So again, I'm questioning the validity of Sue and Sue's statements.
So you're saying that they were very
were they very
protective of women?
Very, but were they assimilated to American culture where they had taken a different viewpoint, or were these like first generation immigrants with?
Well, a lot of them are
immigrants. Second. Well, a lot of them are. Well, a lot of them are second generation, so their parents are first generation. But even with the parents that I met who are first generation, they're still, you know, I never met one demure mother. I never once met a mother who was unafraid to call out her husband or call out another male in the room.
So maybe is that?
I'm wondering, like,
is that like the power America has granted them, maybe, or.
But I've got a like. I know that is an aspect of Latin culture to have that male-female dynamic, but even if you watch soap operas from Mexico,
I think we tend to think of immigrants as just Mexico too. I think if you were to get immigrants from like the Middle East, or I'm thinking the Middle East would be the big one where this would be an issue.
Okay, the Middle East definitely different issue.
Well, and that might even have a religious connotation that's even deeper rooted than like culture. Yeah,
most definitely.
So,
because
Asia, this would be a much different conversation.
Yeah, you know, Asian immigrants. It's. I think we tend to just think Mexico when we think immigration.
I definitely went there.
I do it too. Yeah, no, I mean it's the. I mean, I think we have more Mexican immigrants than anyone else. But yeah,
the Asian immigrant population is definitely growing.
Yes, Mexican immigrants equal 28% of U.S. immigrants, but Asians are the fastest growing group of immigrants and the most highly educated, as 60% have a bachelor's degree. One more quick point, and then we probably want to pause the video for our second one, but we kind of touched on this.
Going pretty well so far.
Yeah. So like, aside from traditional mental health care services, immigrants need psychoeducation. They talk about how they need so many other things like educational training for themselves and their children. There's linguistic training, so obviously there's learning a new language, learning how employment works in this country, all of these different things. I was reading this and like pulling aside of just like cultural things, but pulling like a mental health care side of this, I was like, does this sound more like social work to anyone else? Because I'm thinking like as a counselor, like to get a front line of people, like thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm like, we're meeting higher needs than what these people might present originally. So I was like, does this feel like, or does this sound more like social work to anyone else? I just wanted to run that by you guys.
Yeah, it definitely sounds a lot like social work, but if you look at it from the history of counseling, it started out as a vocational guidance group anyway.
Yeah.
The history started with social work, and then it broadened from there.
Yeah.
So, I don't particularly
like
see
our
an
role
issue.
more as like coping mechanisms with a new culture or with family difficulties and stressors because of generational gaps now between children and stuff. But I was like, things like employment and language proficiency and hooking them up with resources. I was like, that's not really our
it's social work, but
counseling jobs.
Yeah.
Social work.
But the book brings that.
It's already really hard anyway because social workers are involved in foster care as well. And the foster care system is completely awful. It's horrible. So they already take on a lot of roles that I would say don't necessarily cater to the root of what they're supposed to be doing. So if they're taking on more than one role, for me it's not a surprise that as a counselor I'm taking on more than one role.
Yeah, I think it would just be if you worked in like an agency. It'd be more,
depending on the setting too.
Which they want us to do, but
I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, especially when you create that relationship with the client. And again, I'm going to tie it to City Year because I had so many students, because I was the behavior coordinator, so working with them on their behavior, trying to figure out why they're acting out the way they are, was something that was very important. But I also felt it was kind of my job to help them be prepared for the future. Yeah. So they had Wells Fargo come and do a presentation on money and what a credit card is and things like that. And the people who were discussing it were so dry and boring that the kids are not even paying any attention. And I felt at that point it was my job to sit down and make sure they got it.
Yeah.
This is not your money. They want you to have this card because they want you to spend their money that they're going to owe you. They're basically the stereotypical loan shark who's going to break your legs. But instead of harming you physically, they're going to harm you financially. Yeah. And you'll be, you'll be screwed for the rest of your life.
Going back to this point,
we're at 46.
Let me just, let's keep going if we can keep going.
Okay.
Going back to that point, we'll pause in a second. But, what was the point I think?
We were talking about financial multiple roles.
Multiple roles. I see why they would want us to do that, like have multiple roles. It's very nice in theory. But I'm thinking back to my old job. If I did sales, and if they're like, hey, Artie, we're going to need you to start doing accounting now. And we're going to need you to start doing HR.
Yeah.
I would either say no or pay me more.
Yeah.
You know, compensate me.
Yeah.
So, that's great in theory.
Everything to everybody.
You can't, but I think taking on the multiple roles that are needed in this instance are
if
not
you're working with these people, which you would specialize and have a passion for and would go into. So
that's true, but I also think it's different because if you're going from sales into accounting to HR and to all these other things that require specific sets of skills, it's very different. Whereas as a counselor, it's very easy for me to pull up, okay, we need to make sure you understand that I'm here for you as an advocate and what you need. So preventing psychological issues from happening, if you can do that, and it's as simple as pulling it up on your laptop or your iPad, okay, here's how the employment system works here. I don't know the ins and outs.
As a counselor, I can't imagine myself ever doing that.
Yeah,
I'd be like, here's a resource, here's where you go take classes. Come see me next week. Let me know how you're feeling.
No, and that's what I'm saying. I definitely agree. I think that's what you should be doing. I'm not I don't think as a counselor taking on the role as an employment. No, I'm not going to help you get a job. I'm going to help you know how to.
So you're willing to
get on the path.
Yeah.
So it's educating you in the sense that okay, I know you're really stressed out right now. To relieve some of that stress, here's how you go and get a job. Okay,
Yeah.
this is where I want you to go. That this is your action step for this week. Action steps. Go to an employment
like
center.
social work to me.
Yeah.
That feels like it fits in the direction of social work.
Yeah, but I think as long as you understand that there is that connection and you're not going to be able to separate from that, I think it'll
Potentially, depending on what populations you're gonna work with.
yeah definitely.
Yeah,
but
but
if
even
we're-
like, I wouldn't do like project management in my own job, which is related to sales.
Mhm.
You know, it's not my job. You know,
Yeah.
it's part of the same area, but it's not. You know.
Like all of it contributes to overall wellness.
yeah, so if their
But-
stressor is not having a job, you say, okay, well, you know, why do you not think you have a job? Like, why do you think it's hard for you to get a job? This can even, you can take this even away from the immigrant population and put it towards the black community. Because in one of the case studies in Sue and Sue that we read earlier, there was the white counselor who said that he was like aggressive and all of this. And when you read from the black male's perspective, he's like, well, you know, it's like I can't get a job. And the counselor refused to like look at the resume. He's like, okay, well, you know, why does this make you depressed? And he was so focused on the depression part when the black man was like, why aren't you listening to me? Like, I'm saying, like, this is my issue and I don't know how to move past it. Okay, open that door. Like, figure out, okay, well, why do you think this isn't happening? Maybe I can help you in this area. And they're obviously stressed, they're obviously depressed, and our job is to help them work through that. So if looking over their resume will help them work through this, I don't necessarily see that that's a bad thing. Or something that isn't a part of my
I think
job.
it comes back to the setting that you work in, or where you are, and who you're working with.
Yeah, but that could potentially come up with anyone. White members in the coal mining town who are trying to get out of the coal mining town.
Yeah. I mean, I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I see where you're coming from, but
I mean, I'm not saying it'll
Yeah.
happen like all the time, but if it was I just see it as just like another hat I put on.
Yeah.
That still
Yeah.
is under the
I think I
overall
would start
encompassing
right. Be
counselor.
like, there's this great resource who looks over resumes, but tell me about your frustration about not getting a job. I think that would be how I would differ personally. And depending on where I work too. But anyway.
You want to pause?
Yeah,
now?
I was gonna say, do we want to pause and go to the next call?